Welcome to Lectionary Call-In for Tuesday, November 24th of 2020, where two laypersons, a pastor, and an academician gather for about 55 minutes each week to discuss the Gospel Lectionary for the coming Sunday. And this Sunday is November 29th. Each Tuesday, we call in from wherever we may be at 6:30 a.m. Eastern Time. And for our friend Charles Willard in Minnesota, that's 5:30 a.m. Our little team is working to be faithful to Lectionary Year B, and we hope this discussion will provide areas of focus and reflection. We develop perspectives independently after the leadoff person shares some questions, and then we share, encourage, and challenge each other. And here are the folks joining us in today's discussion.
Bill Hall.
Sarah Mickelson.
Charles Willard.
And I'm Don Upton, and our leadoff today is Bill Hull, and he's going to not just lead us off into this text, but to introduce us to the new year. Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Don, Sarah, Charles, and welcome to others who join this dialogue conversation a little later. I'm going to briefly seek to build a bridge from year A to year B, and then call on Sarah to introduce a new feature to this conversation, and then we will proceed as usual. Last year we finished year A, which focuses primarily on Matthew. Today we begin year B, which focuses primarily on the Gospel of Mark. Much could be said. I'll highlight a couple of things. Mark is in many ways distinctively different from the other Gospels, the four, the so-called synoptics, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and then John. For example, a clue is that in the Gospel of Mark, the word immediately is used much more often than in the other three Gospels. One quick example. In the first chapter of Mark, it begins with Jesus and John the Baptist as adults, beginning their adult ministry. Jesus is baptized. Jesus goes out and begins his ministry in Galilee. He calls Simon, Andrew, James, and John as disciples, heals a man with unclean spirits, heals others, preaches in Galilee, heals a leper, all in one chapter. A signal to us that Mark is about movement and about immediately, and as we would say today, getting on with it. Moving on. Now, for example, we're entering Advent. In a moment, you're going to hear that we begin Advent in chapter 13 of Mark. In Mark, there is nothing of the narrative associated with Advent or Christmas that we're used to from Matthew and Luke and by interpretation in the Gospel of John. There's no announcement to Mary or Joseph of the coming birth, no family tree, no birth stories, no wise men, no star, no Herod and the flight to Egypt, no information about Jesus' childhood. Again, we leap into Jesus' life as an adult. Another quick feature is that that will illustrate something. During the 4 Sundays of Advent, we will focus on 2 passages from Mark, one from Luke and one from John. And during the rest of year B, those who develop the lectionary will fill in the gaps at times by using gospel passages from Matthew, Luke, and John. So just signaling to us that Mark has a different shape to it, and the pathway will be a bit different. But glad you're going to be with us in this journey. Sarah, let me move to you, please.
Well, happy Thanksgiving. That's the first thought. Thank you for coming on this journey with us. And while the commercial world is flooding the sound waves with holiday tunes and every store presents images of Christmas, how's your heart doing these days? Are you, like me, hungering for the gospel, to hear the voice of God saying, "Fear not, I bring you glad tidings of great joy"? The Lectionary podcast team, that's us, would like to invite you into our conversation, maybe into a dialogue. We offer some questions to you to travel with you this Advent season, for you to mull over, as Bill Hall might say, and to reflect maybe as you travel through Advent and the Christmas season with us. So here's question number 1. In thinking about your faith journey, What has this year taught you or changed about your understanding of waiting and longing for the inbreaking of Christ? Question number 2. 2020 has presented us with so many uncertainties. How have you felt God's presence or incarnation as you have waited? And we invite you to share your reflection. If you want to pose a question or you just want to communicate with us, we have an email address now to share with you, and we would like to give you that now. It's Lectionary call-in at palmacia.org, and I'll spell that. Lectionary, Lectionary, at Palma, PALMACEIA.org. And we're going to do our best to check that email once a week at least, and say thank you, and hear your thoughts and your reflections as we travel through Advent. And it's our intention to pose questions every season as we approach the season, so that you'll see that these questions are going to evolve and change as we travel through the liturgical year. So we look forward to hearing from you, and with that, I'll pass my baton back to Bill. Bill, you're muted.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you. Anyway, thank you, Sarah. And as our listeners will notice, there's some congruence, I think, between Sarah's overarching questions and the 3 that I will present today. So thank you, Sarah, for that. The scripture passage for today, I've already mentioned, it's from Mark chapter 13, verses 24 through 37. And I read for us from the New Revised Standard Version. This is the word of the Lord, let us attend. But in those days, after that suffering, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will be falling from heaven, and the powers in the heavens will be shaken. Then they will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory. Then he will send out the angels and gather his elect from the 4 winds, from the end of the earth to the ends of heaven. From the fig tree, learn its lesson. As soon as its branch becomes tender and puts forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. So also when you see these things taking place, you know that he is near at the very gate. Truly I tell you, this generation will not pass away until all these things have taken place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. But about that day or hour no one knows, neither the angels in heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. Beware, keep alert, for you do not know when the time will come. It is like a man going on a journey, when he leaves home and puts his slaves in charge, each with his work, and commands the doorkeeper to be on the watch. Therefore, keep awake, for you do not know when the master of the house will come, in the evening, or at midnight, or at cockcrow, or at dawn. Or else he may find you asleep when he comes suddenly. And what I say to you, I say to all, keep awake. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Now, it is our custom to call on Charles at the beginning and toward the end. Charles, your beginning oversight, please.
If you didn't read my lips, what I said was in the beginning, I wanted to remind you that we're beginning on a new gospel, and each of these gospels is distinctive. Each of them has its own differences. 3 of them, as you know, share commonalities in terms of structure and patterns. The Gospel of John marches to his own drum, and it's just a beginning. It's the beginning of a new season. a new lectionary series, and so buckle up. Have a great ride.
Thank you, Charles. And Charles, I forgot to check with you. I assume in these questions, if you want to enter in, you will do so. Otherwise, I will call directly on my colleagues. I have 3 questions to offer, and I'll begin with the first one. And Don, I'll give you a heads up. I want to come to you first, and then Sarah. In this passage, we are told, quote, "Therefore keep awake, for you do not know when the master of the house will come, in the evening or at midnight or at cockcrow or at dawn, or else he may find you asleep when he comes suddenly. And what I say to you, I say to all, keep awake." But we are also informed, quote, "About that day or hour no one knows, neither the angels in heaven nor the Son, but only the Father," end quote. Pondering the tension between the command to keep awake and the caution that no one, not even Jesus, knows when what we are looking for will happen, how do these messages inform the living of your faith today? Again, stay alert, but you have no idea when what you're looking for will happen. Don.
It's tempting to say that who doesn't feel that tension? Maybe you don't, but it's hard to believe. Of course it's there. And to answer or take my best shot at this, I just wanted to highlight something that about 3 years ago, Mark Davis wrote about this, because this tension tends to grab at the gut and instead of the head, and there's this desire to kind of rush in and figure out what it means. And he had this sweet note in I think 2017. He said he was talking about misinterpretations and misuses of this, and he said that wildness is a part of the power of an apocalyptic text. And he emphasized the wildness and even used analogies of spray painting over things to express yourself. And so I'm embracing the gut a little bit today and listening to him and his advice. So that tension, I think, for me, creates a sense of exhaustion, not just like for my life, but when I read it, and then this goes on for millennia. If you read it a certain way, it's exhaustion, it creates speculation, it creates shock. And so you're challenging me, Bill, trying to get beyond that. And I started looking at being awake and being asleep. And I know, Charles, we can't get into the minds of the first century listener or the second century reader, but I don't think they're talking about the analogy of sleep being death. I think it's sleeping. So let's go with that. It's being awake or being asleep. When I'm asleep, I'm awake. I'm alive. It's not a sleep of death. It's not a sleep of nothing. As a matter of fact, I dreamed last night. It's a little after 6:30 in the morning. I had a dream last night. I was awake, or awake sleep. I was alive sleep. And I think that's the analogy that's being used. Are you awake or are you asleep? But we're here. We're here. And so that pulls just things a little more closely together. And what I want to just set up for discussion is, I think this is about the human condition. And I think sleeping when you're awake, sleeping when you're alive, means that you cannot see your neighbor, and you're not aware of what's going on. That we can, and there's a lot of work been done on this in terms of sociology, psychology, world affairs, that you can see the analogy in history about this nation was asleep. These people were asleep. They did not see what was going on. So if you're alive when you sleep, just for example, you don't see how bad things can be in a neighboring community because we have big data. And the tyranny of big data is, you could say, what's the unemployment rate in New York or Florida or North Carolina or Minnesota, Charles? And you're going to come up with a big number. And it might, on a good year, look like everything's okay, but it's not true. If you get down to the zip code or the neighborhood, you're going to see that many places are in a deep, deep depression during this pandemic. You can't see them. You're not awake. Something hasn't grabbed you. It's a gut. like this, I think, shakes us to say, look, this is happening. Another example might be denials of what horrible things human beings can do to each other, that we can go to sleep. We might see newsreels. We might read newspapers about things and terrible things going on as we confront different communities and different tribes confront each other. But we don't really feel it. We don't really see it. I would throw in Holocaust denial as a part of that. We're alive, but we're asleep if you buy into that, and you can't understand our role in human history. And then the final would be just the sleeping through human needs. There's over, I think, something like 70 million people who are insecure in their food. That means 17 million children. There are tens of millions of children who've been affected by trauma, who will not have the cognitive abilities to move through life and thrive. So I want to hold up, Bill, that there is tension between those two things, knowing and not knowing, but I think there's an emphasis on being awake, and those things that are going off all around us is a signal that we can see. If we help each other, we can be awake and not sleeping through our lives and our responsibility. That's my best shot, Bill.
Thank you, Don. Sarah.
Oh, Don, thank you so much for setting that up. So I see the tension, or I feel the tension most effectively or sharply when I see the distance between what is happening now and what will be. And your thoughts about being physically asleep and awake tapped into the idea that when we're physically asleep, we have that thing in our brain that disconnects our physical responses, preventing us, if you will, from physically acting, responding, or taking steps toward what we see when we're awake or what we hear when we're awake. So our ability to respond is suspended. Your question gave me a moment to think about those things we wait for. And my list looks like this: water to boil, a long-awaited child or grandchild to be born, news, good or bad, to get home, for our travel, our motion towards something to come to an end. We look for the right indicators. That's a Dawn thing. The opportunity to do something, the right moment to act, an approaching storm to land and pass. Clarity. These are all things we wait for. The waiting is what we physically do while we're moving between what is happening right now and what we will do next, or what we will be invited into next. So maybe we have fallen asleep and gotten entangled in things and places and in routines, and these are only and that when we use these things as markers and signposts and practices, and when they're lost, it feels like the loss of the temple for the people in Mark, or like the loss of going to a physical building on Sunday during COVID. And in my reluctance to shift or change, in my wanting to look backwards, do I miss the forward movement of God in a different and new direction? Are things falling apart or falling together? I think we're in that moment. That's where your question led me. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Probably goes without saying there's no right or wrong answer to any of these questions. And they are questions, even though I wrote them, that I have wrestled with. You know, how does this tension inform the living of my faith today? To me, it is a reminder that mindfulness is urgent. Mindfulness is urgent. not just spiritually. If I'm driving in Pinellas County, I had better be mindful, okay? Now, I like to think of myself as one who doesn't really need that reminder, but I do. What's happening? What's going on with me? What does God want? We need to seek to read the signs of the times. Now, I was helped personally in dealing with this question to look at the verse immediately preceding the beginning of our passage. I began with verse 24. Let me read verse 23, which repeats but adds something. Quote, "But be alert. I have already told you everything," end quote. And that phrase, "I have already told you everything," caught my attention. At Palmacia Presbyterian Church, we welcome the children to come down singing his, Micah 6:8. God is saying, I've already told you what is good. This isn't new information. At least that's how I take Micah 6:8. I've told you, mortal, what is good. Do justice, love kindness, walk humbly with your God. That was helpful to me. God does not make a secret of what God wants for us and from us, right? There's no secret here. Now, that seems simple maybe, but that was helpful to me, that the be alert is pay attention to what I've already told you. Now, the other thing that I'll end with, in today's world, I would say it this way: be mindful of what is happening, but remember you're not in control. That's part of the tension for me. You need to be alert. You need to be seeking to follow Micah 6:8. But ultimately, Bill Hall and others, you're not in control. I guarantee you, folk, if I were manager of the universe right this moment, things would be very different. But I am not the manager of the universe, thanks be to God, because I'd make a big mess of it as anybody else would do. So those are helpful reminders to me. Question 2, and Sarah, I'll go to you first. There is clearly a somber mood in this passage, and I'll quote some phrases: suffering, sun darkened, stars falling, powers in heaven shaken, beware, or else he may find you asleep when he comes suddenly, end of quotes of phrases. How does this tone and emotional atmosphere influence your entry into Advent this year? Sarah.
Well, I have to give a nod to Mark Davis myself in his blog, Left Behind and Loving It. In reading that this week, I found myself walking in tune a little bit with what he was saying. He gives a nod to the book of Daniel and to Christ coming in the clouds. And I wondered about the shifting, the sense of theological crisis with the loss of the temple in Daniel, the king, and the land were all imperiled. And I see that, or I feel that sense a little bit to us as well. So I hear this as a question: how do we hear the promises of God in the midst of crisis? I think that, for me, is the thread to walk with this week. I hear this as an invitation to re-engage, to look forward, not backward, to let my eyes adjust to the new and see the hands of God at work in the world around me. And what am I seeing for the first time? What am I hearing for the first time? And in what way is the Spirit shaking me loose from my routine, my pattern, and my security, and maybe moving me toward a new and deeper understanding at the same time? So that's what I hear this somber mood doing. It's providing enough friction, if you will, for me to stay or stop what I'm doing, and inviting me to consider the opportunity of doing something new or something different, or to follow something new or something different. So I love that gives us the moments of pause.
Thank you, Sarah. Well said. Well said. Don.
I think I'm doing okay right now. I'm doing okay. People around me may not be doing okay. I'm having a good day. So I'm claiming the day. I'm going to have a bright, sunny day today, I think. I'm doing okay. I don't have COVID. Everything's okay. I claim the day. So that's my starting point with this. So what's this somber thing? Now, tomorrow may not be, but I claim the day today. I got a happy, shiny day. And what I'm thinking is the somberness is real darkness, and I think it's a call to embrace that night. And you're referring to Advent. Advent's got both. We were raised that way. It's there in the scriptures. It's not I'm having a good day. I'm awake, but I'm also going to sleep. There's sleep and awake. There's the numbness or the intoxication of Advent, the expectancy, the setting things right, but there's also the sharpness, and one goes with the other. There's the calm. I'm having a good day. It's a calm day, I think. I think I'll have a calm day, but this is encouraging the tossed day. There's the warm and the cold. There's the summer solstice and the winter solstice, and I that's coming off as trite probably, but I think this is an encouragement to go there. And the reason I'm raising it is if I'm having a great day today, I'm less likely to be engaged in hospitality and companionship. I think. I'm just pointing at myself. A good day means that I'm actually not fully human. I don't fully see things the way I should. I'm actually not awake. My day is so good, I'm not awake. I can look beyond things and I can deny things. So I think it's a question of what is Christian companionship and hospitality and service actually look like? And what I want to put out there is that I don't think there's such thing as empathy without shared darkness. I think they go together. And I think when I was a kid, and I've witnessed a couple things as a child that were very difficult on me, that I remember one or both circumstances, I witnessed them alone. No one came to my side. There was no companionship in the darkness. I just want to say the blindness and the lack of awakeness is on a bright sunny day, not at night. So I think empathy is shared darkness, and I would bring it home today and say simply the extremes of great wealth and poverty in America and on this planet are areas of great concern. But the fact that they're there is not enough. We have to understand what darkness and what limitations it puts on us to be able to thrive, live, and serve each other. The idea that there is peace is not fully understood until we can have a serious conversation about our responsibilities and the impact of violence. So I'm going there, the darkness of Advent, and I'm not trying to make it a dark, dreary time, and I'm not trying to make this passage necessarily that dark, but that there's a companionship piece in here that's important, and I am just fully capable of not being awake on a bright, sunny day as I go about my business, and I think that's what the shaking of this is supposed to mean to me. Bill?
Thank you, Don. Sarah, I also am going to reference Mark Davis. In his article that I read about this passage, and I will paraphrase, what I heard him saying was, let's be careful that we don't tame this story. Stuff about stars falling. He says, and I quote, I suggest we let the wildness be wild. Let the lack of neat wrappings be missing without having to supply it. Let the text have its say. And his counsel to preachers is letting a wild text lead to a wild sermon without treating the congregation like fragile glass. That phrase caught my attention. That we sometimes, I think we need to protect people from the tough stuff in the scripture, and there's a lot of tough stuff in Scripture. We've been over that with some of the other passages, like, whoa, gee, we wish this weren't there in Scripture, because this is really hard. So I take that counsel of just go with the kind of wildness in this and not overthink it and analyze it and get too far into the weeds. This year, friends and neighbors, is certainly a time of wildness, of the shaking of foundations that we have taken for granted, politically, socially, medically. Almost what foundational assumptions have we made that have not been shaken in this year? Maybe you've seen the joke of a guy who says, I never stay up for New Year's, but I am this year because I want to make sure 2020 comes to an end. We're joking about something that's really very, very painful. Here's what I thought, and maybe I'm echoing you, Don. I wrote it this way. With the wildness going on in the world around us, especially in this nation, in contrast, God's wildness is grounded in God's sovereignty and compassion for all people, desiring that the human family embrace God's abundance, knowing that there is already enough for everyone. In other words, that's not denying the darkness, it's not denying the risk, but it's saying that these stars falling and the shaking is done by a God who ultimately loves the human family and wants our wholeness and our being a true community for each other. Now that leads to the third question for me. What hope or joy, if any, do you sense in this passage and that you experience in the here and now in this difficult season in the life of America and the world? What hope or joy do you sense? And I'll speak first and then move to my colleagues. I think it is possible to be aware, to be alert to what is happening in the world. We don't have to hide ourselves. For example, we can ask a different kind of question in the midst of the darkness. Echoing last week's final passage from Matthew, we could ask, where are the least of these being served? Where is that command being followed? Where are they not being served? Remember, the sheep and the goats, you did it to me, you did not do it to me. In the midst of COVID-19, what behaviors are serving the greater good and which choices are creating potential harm for others? I might note for us the current debate over whether or not people should be traveling and being together in larger family groups. And then I read the lectionary passages includes Isaiah 64. Yet, verses 8 through 9, yet, O Lord, you are our Father, and we are the clay, and you are our potter. We are all the work of your hand. Do not be exceedingly angry, O Lord, and do not remember iniquity forever. Now consider, we are all your people. That's the heart of the God that we serve. We are all God's people. There's also hope for me in the figure of the fig tree. The fig tree just grows. And Jesus says, you can tell when summer is near. And I take that as a sign of hope. It may be winter, but summer's coming. And then it says, like a man going on a journey, puts the servants in charge, each with his work. Part of my hope is that God continues to entrust to us the work of the kingdom on earth. Think of Peter at the seashore. Peter, you blew it as publicly and as embarrassingly as possible, and I love you. Get back to work. That God trusts us to continue to do God's work on earth. To me, there's hope in that. And not knowing when Christ will return frees us to serve today, not to speculate, not to climb a mountain and say, tomorrow at 8 p.m. the world's coming to an end, but rather trusting that in God's time, God will fulfill God's promises. That's some of the hope that I see. Sarah?
Well, So I listened to the Followers of the Way, and I picked up a quote from John Debevoise that really resonated with me. The Followers of the Way have a podcast you can find at paulmesia.org. He used the phrase, practice sensitivity, the sensitivity to life of being aware of the world around you. And in that watchfulness, you can recognize the work of God, like the fig tree, like the appearance of the winter stars at night, like the change in the light as the sun moves southward toward the solstice. Our days have been getting shorter and will continue to get shorter, and so the light is changing. The position of the sun is affecting that. Janet Hunt's blog this week in Dancing with the Word really touched on this for me. Maybe God is using this time as a gift to open my heart, and perhaps yours as well, to welcome a world far different than the one we have grown far too accustomed to. Thanks, Janet. And maybe in that call to keep awake, the point is that you and I are among those shaping the world that God intends and promises to bring even now. And she shifted my thinking from being an observer for all this change to being a part of the solution, or a part of the shape as we move forward, the work that God would have us do to transform the world. So I was reminded that God keeps promises, and are the actions we take, the words that we say, a part of the God with us, Emmanuel, promise for someone else?
Thank you, Sarah. And Don, I'll move to you, and then you can take us through the other parts of our experience. Don?
Thank you. Well, your question was about joy. Is that right? So I think it's, if you're facilitating a class, moderating a round table or a Bible study, that might be a good question for you. Because this, I think, turns joy on its head. You know, if this could be a meditation on joy, joy ain't carefree. Joy is very busy. Joy is maybe staying awake to the point where you can't keep your head up, whatever task you're taking on or whatever service you have. Joy is filled with fatigue. Joy is prickly. Joy ain't easy. And so your question has helped me meditate. If you're awake, what does joy look like? And it's prickly. And I think the second thing I wanted to share is the spirit of joy. I think I have a temptation to declare the world at peace. My world. Today the world is not disrupted. It's a peaceful day. I mean that. I sign my emails, even business, peace. But I have no standing to declare peace at all. Things are disrupted. And I think this passage also is meant to be that pull or that kick in the gut as a reminder that the world is turned on its head all the time. And some of this reaches me on a given day. I'm supposed to meditate on it. And I think that's what both of you are saying. And because I will have my day, another, I will. And I would like to have companionship. I would like to have friendship on those days as well. So the one thing that came to my mind is, because this is the whole universe seems to be flipping around in this passage. I think that's true. We all feel that, and folks that are living in especially difficult times feel their universes. They don't need to see a star falling from the sky or the sun darken and the moon not reflecting the light to have the same sensation, that there's a lack of control and we don't know what's going to happen. And I think that requires Christian thinking and awareness and companionship. For them, for all of us, there are those points where it's inexplicable. And I think that's where, thank you, Mark Davis, again, that's the fourth time we've cited him, now that I said his name, that wildness is not meant to give us just an excuse to go there, but to say it is wild, and that we need to say it. and that when those things come along, it's an awareness of our obligations to each other. I know there's an assurance in this as well, but I'm just looking at the wildness right now, and that's inexplicable. And you need a friend to put a word on it. Think about the toughest challenges you've had. For me, they're inexplicable. I cannot describe to you that feeling of things being flipped over, and a good friend puts the words to it. It could be a professional person that puts the words to it, but we need that. It gives us meaning. And I think these are words that have been translated for us that says, there's comfort in that we can describe what the sky looks like and what it feels like to go through that. So worst behaviors I can think of in a time where we're seeking that kind of joy is when hope is prepackaged. And the propaganda of the world tells us that everything is okay when it's not. And so today, in Christian discipline, I reject that. I reject that propaganda, and it is a temptation we all have. I'm not just pointing at politicians and leaders. I think that's the temptation we have, is to say, everything's okay today. I'm fine today. And it's not. That's dark side of propaganda. And so I reject that in the Christian spirit today. And thank you for your comments and those wonderful questions, Bill. We do commend those to you for teaching a class. That's one of the reasons we do that, is to say, what could really get conversation going? And we do look forward to your emails. And before we wrap up, Charles, I want to turn to you to see if you have any comments about what we've been reflecting on today.
Just one comment about staying awake and falling asleep. I got up much earlier this morning, and among the things I did, because of another little project I'm working on, is to go through the whole Gospel of Mark to see where Jesus went and what his travels were, and see if I can make some sense out of that, and then compare it to the other two synoptic Gospels. But I found, some things just don't go away. The passage that we have today ends by Jesus urging his disciples to keep awake and not to go to sleep. Barely in the next chapter, that's the 13th chapter. In the next chapter, they went to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." He took with him Peter and James and John, and began to be distressed and agitated. And he said to them, "I'm deeply grieved, even unto death. Remain here and keep awake." Going a little further, he threw himself on the ground and prayed that if possible this cup might pass from him. He said, "Abba, Father, for you all things are possible. Remove this cup from me, yet not what I want, but what you want." He came and found them sleeping. And he said to Peter, "Simon, are you asleep? Could you not keep awake 1 hour? Keep awake and pray that you may not come into the time of trial. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." And again he went away and prayed and saying the same words. And once more he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were very heavy, and they did not know what to say to him. He came a third time and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and taking your rest? Enough." So it's a common issue, isn't it?
Thank you, Charles. And we're almost out of time, but you teed up some big things, and I just want to check maybe a minute from each of you to see if there any follow-up. The reason I'm excited about it is you could ask, why do they need to stay awake? Why do they need to stay awake? And since we're allowed today to think of the wildness of Scripture, and I'm thinking about, I think he needs companionship. I think Christ needs companionship. Stay awake even if your head is nodding. They need to be present. They don't need to be alive and asleep. They need to be alive and awake. And maybe he also needs them to be praying, to be active. So I think I'm just excited that you brought that passage into this, because there's Jesus alone when they are awake. When they are alive but asleep. He is alone when they are not aware of what's going on, which says a lot about the passion too. It just meant a lot to me that you read that, Charles. Sarah or Bill, did you have any follow-up on that before we say goodbye?
Real quickly, echoing that, I don't think you have to be a pastor to have this experience. It's amazing how many times, having ministered to somebody in crisis later, they will say to me, "Bill, I don't remember a word you said to me. What I remember is you were there.
Beautiful. Sarah?
I'm with you, Don. I think that the keep awake has a lot to do with pay attention and notice that God's breaking in. Notice that this transition is starting and occurring and that the world is becoming as God made it. It's hard to see that when we're presented with evidence to the contrary.
Thank you. And for those listening in, Palmacia Presbyterian Church is at 3501 West San Jose. That's in Tampa, Florida. And for more information, you can go to palmacia.org. That's PALMACEIA.org. And you also heard at the first of this podcast, we have our own email, which is lectionarycallin@palmacia.org. So we look forward to hearing from you, and you're always welcome, and we'll see you next time.